You know, SAA has been moved from the Finance Ministry back to the Public Enterprises Department. Now, the presidency says this is part of a strategy to turn the cash-strapped national airlines fortunes around. In a statement, Treasury says the decision by President Cyril Ramaphosa was gazetted yesterday. It follows a study commissioned by both Treasury and Public Enterprises. The Finance Department says Minister Pravin Gordhan is best placed as the custodian of the airlines, as he's in charge of other major state-owned companies. Now, for more on that story, we are joined by SATAWU spokesperson Zanele Sabela. Zanele, thank you so much for your time. Firstly, your reaction to this, and also tell us potentially what bearing this could have on employees.
Hi, Thabo. Thanks for the opportunity. From our side, we actually would have preferred it if SAA was actually placed under the Department of Transport. And the main reason for that is because the Department of Transport is the one that issues out licenses to operate in South Africa for transport operators. And what has happened in the meantime is that the Transport Department has been issuing licenses to foreign players and allowing them to actually operate domestically. So part of the problem that SAA finds itself in, and it actually has to compete against these foreign players in a market that is owned. You don't find this anywhere else in the world that foreign airlines are actually allowed to operate inland. So this is some of the problem, and we would have preferred that DOT, if SAA is under DOT, then it is able to see, to manage the situation. So for us, we are at this point watching this with Public Enterprises now having SAA, being in charge of SAA, when quite frankly some time ago when Minister Pravin Gordhan was at Treasury, then it was moved to Treasury. And now that he's back at Public Enterprises, then now it's gone back to Public Enterprises, and we're just wondering, we're looking, we're watching, and we're suspecting that his intention, he always maintained that he wanted to privatize SAA, and he hasn't made that, it's not a secret. This is what he intends to do with it. But then if privatization is usually followed by job losses, and this is what we're worried about, and our members are really concerned about that.
Well, I mean, Zanele, you mentioned the Department of Transport, but the department itself also has some criticisms of its own.
Which department? The Department of Transport?
The Department of Transport, yes.
It's true, but then also the Department of Public Enterprises also has criticisms of its own. Mm-hmm. All the state-owned enterprises that it is in charge of also have problems. So I'm not sure that necessarily that is particularly a criticism that is just directed to DOT.
Now, is this something that you have communicated to government?
We haven't, because these kind of things are just done and we are not consulted. This was just announced yesterday. We were surprised, and also was the announcement that the appointment of the acting CEO, the new acting CEO of SA Express. So Minister Gordhan is obviously moving quite fast towards a destination that he is, going towards. We're just wondering, is he doing this, with the blessing of the president? And this is what we're wondering.
All right, Zanele, thank you so much for your time. Much appreciated. Now, for more on the story, we're also joined on the line by Solidarity Research Institute head Connie Mulder. Connie, thank you so much for your time. Firstly, your reaction to the news. Do we expect any changes within SAA now that it's under the Public Enterprises Department?
Firstly, good afternoon, Thabo. It's nice to be on air. From our perspective, this is not an unexpected move. There have been talks in the background. We've heard rumors, and then Minister Gordhan announcing the merger of SA Express and SAA basically meant that this was going to happen, since SA Express is under Public Enterprises and SAA under Treasury. Mm-hmm. From our perspective, we're not really that fussed with which government department is running SAA. The challenges stay the same. We're still full on that SAA needs a strategic equity partner, and eventually it needs to privatize and get out of majority government control, where in order to be a going concern and to go forward and to ensure that all the workers who work there at the moment will have a future going forward.
But let's talk about the possible effect it could have on operations, on employees particularly.
Well, obviously with the merger between SA Express and SAA, we're concerned that there's going to be staff reductions in terms of overhead, but SA Express is much, much smaller than SAA. So we'll see if they do staff rationalisation. It does, however, make sense from government's perspective to have all of this under public enterprises, because SA is, in effect, a public enterprise. And with Minister Gordon effectively cleaning up Eskom and busy with Denel, we're cautiously optimistic that he will enforce governance at SAA and then commit to getting the strategic equity partner, which they've committed to, and then finalise that process and get it through and finally get some private sector principles going there.
Exactly, that's exactly what I wanted to touch on. I mean, you've got Eskom, you've got Denel, which are both very troubled state entities, which are both under the Public Enterprises Department. Surely that must bring some sort of, you can't be pleased by that.
Well, you have to remember that these enterprises were under Minister Lynn Brown, who was an absolute disaster at public enterprises, and these bore the brunt of state capture. So what we have seen, however, under public enterprises under President Ramaphosa is at least a committed effort to turn these around with new boards, with new governance, with transparent presentation. Suddenly we know what's going on. With Denel, we had the situation with the CEO being fired after giving a bursary to Suprama Mapelo's son for flying lessons. So the noises are sort of, they're talking the talk. And if any industry, if any ministry has it, it's most likely Mr. Gordon, who was quite vicious with state capture ANC cadres in the parliamentary hearings. So we're not, if somebody has to run it in government, we're not that fussed with public enterprises and Mr. Gordon doing it. Our preference, of course, is that SAA especially gets privatized as quickly as possible, that it moves, that we get a strategic equity partner in, that we get it to finally to move from public enterprises to private enterprise and get it out into the private sector competing with other airlines where it should be.
Right, lastly, before I let you go, as you mentioned, SAA, it's a jumbo cataclysm. How do they fix it? And do you expect things to be fixed within a particular amount of time? Will you be giving the department time to actually sort out all these issues?
So we initially had a business rescue application that we finalized, and we were going to basically lodge it with the High Court, and then SAA CEO reached out to us and asked if we could suspend it, and we gave him a list of demands. The very first thing that needs to happen, however, is we need to start sticking to timelines, and we need to get a strategic equity partner in, even if it's a minority shareholder, for the simple reason private capital enforces governance like transparency and efficiency, and this is what's needed there. We need business people running a business, not bureaucrats.
All right, I just spoke to SATAWU, who said that it would be better for SAA to be under the Transport Department. What is your reaction to that?
For us, it would be better for SAA to not be under government at all. But if it needs to be under a department, public enterprises is most likely, with Minister Gordon, the one with the best oversight at the moment. Transport has its own issues with Transnet and PRASA, and that has been ongoing. We're quite comfortable with, if it needs to be a government department, which we're not preferring, public enterprises with Mr. Gordon is the most likely to actually enforce accountability and transparency.